Minnesota has an epidemic of fraud, as the rest of the nation is learning. We've known here in Minnesota for quite some time that we've had a massive fraud problem, and it's turning out that probably Minnesota is the epicenter of fraud in the United States right now, which is really unfortunate. And we've been working on a lot of anti-fraud measures, particularly over the last year. Unfortunately, the Governor Walz has been fighting us in those efforts. So it hasn't been, the recent developments have not been a surprise here in Minnesota, but I'm glad that the rest of the nation is learning what's happening. I'm very glad that the federal authorities are going to be helping us out here in investigating the fraud and trying to root out the fraud. So that's a welcome development.
I would say the number one culprit in the fraud going on here in Minnesota is our executive. Governor Tim Walz is in charge of making sure that the taxpayers' dollars are protected. And who are the victims? Well, it's the people in Minnesota who rely on services. Right now, I'm cutting aid from nursing homes. I'm cutting aid from special education. And that just pains me to see a billion or more of taxpayer dollars going out the door to fraudsters. The culprit, though, at the end of the day, is Tim Walz, who has had years and years to stop this, but only seems to care now that it's getting national attention.
The challenge is what people don't understand. The legislature doesn't have any oversight in the execution and operation of the agencies who have the sole responsibility to deliver on the services. The governor has had sole responsibility since the day he's arrived. He entered in a fraudulent environment, he's enhanced the fraudulent environment, and he's not done a single thing to stop that fraud. And in fact, I think it was pretty obvious. I think just a couple weeks ago, there was another an update with our FBI, Joe Thompson, who's kind of led all of the fraud today. And they said, hey, now it's been almost 2 years that they've been working on from their discovery, investigation, and prosecution of the Feeding Our Future fraud and the expansion into the others. They asked, how many referrals have you received from the state of Minnesota managed under Governor Walz and the executive body? And his answer was none. They never got an original request on Feeding Our Future, and all of the ancillary fraud is in prosecution or investigation have been solely driven by the work that the FBI has done. Yeah. None. And so if people think that it's going to change, it's not going to change with this governor.
Well, first and foremost, Governor Walz has allowed this fraud to happen. Attorney General Keith Ellison has also been very negligent in his handling of the fraud. It seems like most of our social services programs here in Minnesota were basically set up under kind of the honor system, and there have not been a lot of guardrails. And once the fraudsters realized how to exploit these programs, the administration, the Walz administration, hasn't done really anything to put safeguards in place to prevent the fraud that was developing over a number of years.
At the end of the day, Governor Tim Walz has yet to take any accountability for the massive waste of taxpayer dollars here in Minnesota. And as a result, people are losing their trust not only in his leadership, but in our government's ability to deliver basic services to nursing homes and to special education, as we're cutting money for that, but then letting rampant fraud to increase its scope and popularity through the state of Minnesota. And so the governor needs to take accountability. He needs to make sure that this is stopped immediately. And unfortunately, talking to some agencies and talking to the House Waste, Fraud, and Abuse Oversight Committee, I don't think we've heard the last of fraud in the state of Minnesota.
I think the scale and scope of the fraud in Minnesota, when you look at it, it's almost incomprehensible. And so you have to look at who's been solely in charge of that process, which has been Governor Walz. The executive body controls every agency. And I think to understand how they're either extraordinarily incompetent or willfully complicit. There are no alternatives to it. And I think they're actually both. And so I've started in 2011 or 2017 with child care assistance program fraud of $100 million. It's just grown exponentially. And in spite of it, the programs hit the news is the Feeding Our Future program, where they put $500 million out there and some $300 million is being prosecuted as fraud. But most of that $500 million hasn't hasn't served a single meal. and some of the simple things are, if they would have just gone to the facilities, you hear of the thousands of people being served out of an apartment twice a day. All they would have to do is show up and look at it. In fact, we had, if you follow Minnesota, there was a legislative auditor report that showed that 30 property owners where these businesses claim to operate out of contacted the Department of Education, who managed the program, and they told them, one, the businesses don't exist in their facilities, so they don't exist, period. And one of them, I think, was a city park. And so the Department of Education gave that complaint to the nonprofit Feeding Our Future to address those issues, and the Department of Education continued to pay millions to those 30 with a blatant, simple process of, we've been notified they don't exist, and they rejected and ignored it. Ignored or willfully complicit. I don't think we turn the complaints to how to take care of criminal activity over to the criminals to resolve it on their own, and they did that over and over.